This time I have a video which I'm personally really excited about. I've also wanted to make this video for months now, but because of reasons I haven't been able to get any cutting footage, but luckily now I have it. What I have here this time is 3 prototype sharp longswords from Kvetun. Before we talk about the swords, let's have quite a bit longer disclaimer this time than usual. If you're not interested in the disclaimer, just use the chapters in the description to jump to the actual part about the swords. That's what you're here for anyways. I think it's very important to have transparency when talking about swords like these. So as said, these swords are made by Kvetun, and I personally know Alexander Stankiewicz from Kvetun, and he's a good friend of mine. Secondly, I'm personally involved in the creation of these prototypes. Trying to keep the long story short, as said, I know Alexander, and a few years ago when he was visiting Finland for HLO, we discussed, longswords and Kvetun producing some of them, specifically sharp longswords. Well, things went forwards, and he asked me to send him some specifications of what I, as a competitor, sharp cutting practitioner, and someone who teaches cutting, would want to see from a production sharp longsword. So I compiled some specs from what I would personally want to see from a sharp longsword, and sent them over to Alexander. Then some time passed, more specifically a couple of years because of, reasons. Kvetun started work on those specs and they created their first prototypes. Then fast forward even more, and now they are located in Georgia. That is the country, not the state for you Americans. Now in Georgia they actually had a real possibility to produce and sell sharps, and they put up these 3 models. They invited me over there, I visited them and gave my feedback on these, so everything I'm talking to you guys now, Kvetun already knows. Also I talked to them about training cutting and what these swords are actually used for. And as you can see, I have these 3 swords here. I didn't pay for them, I got them to bring home with me from Georgia and test them out and talk to you guys about them. However, I'm not getting paid for making this video, and Kvetun has absolutely no say about anything I say or talk about in this video. More specifically, they declined to have a look on this video before I actually share it to you guys or have any word on anything I'm talking about. They just said, say anything you want, tell them anything you want, you can share any specs about the swords, and so on and so on. They were very strict about that. And personally, I of course want to give honest feedback to Kvetun about these swords, which I have already done, and help them to improve these swords as much as possible, because as a customer I want to have the best possible sword. And for any of you who actually know Kvetun and their customer service, they actually want proper feedback, not someone trying to praise their product if there's no reason to. They want to actually improve and make better and better products. So that's the disclaimer. I have not paid for these swords. I have a small part in creating them, but again, I'm trying to give honest feedback, so it's up to you if you actually believe me. Then why should you actually listen to my opinion about sharp swords and especially prototypes? Firstly, I have years of experience in training, teaching and competing in cutting, so I know quite a bit about sharp longswords. I'm also generally interested in the historical stuff, the typology and things like that. If you want to have a clearer view of how I train and teach cutting and what I know about it, just take a look at this YouTube channel. I have a very in-depth cutting series, so go and take a look. But now, to the subject that actually interests you people, the swords. Before we get into the specs and such, a very important thing to remember. This is not a review, so do not take it as such. I don't think that it's sensible to review a prototype because that's not something you can buy. This is also not a preview because this is, again, not something you are going to buy. Anything and everything you can see here and what I talk about can and probably will change before this is available as a finished product. As such, I'm just talking about this current iteration of the prototype and nothing else. Now that we have that out of the way, let's actually talk about swords. So as you can see, there are 3 very similar swords here, but they are not identical. They share the basic design. The crosses are identical on all three swords, and so are the pommels. The things that differ between the swords are the blade length and the grip length. And I'm talking about the cord wrap part of the grip here, so basically handle or whatever you want to call it. Basically between the cross and the pommel. So starting from the pommel, we have a Type U pommel. So it's basically a flat and kind of a bell-shaped. The prototypes have a nut here, so it's threaded on. The pommel is not threaded, the nut is. And you can also see the tang coming out here. Of course, this is because it's a prototype, so it's easy to disassemble and reassemble if needed. My recommendation was to go for a pinned pommel in the production model, because I think those are way superior when it comes to sword construction. But again, it's Kvetun, so I think if you really want to have a threaded one, you can just ask them to customize it for you. As already mentioned, all three swords have identical pommels. Next, the grip. So basically the wrapped part from here to here. Two of the swords share the same grip, and the third one has a slightly short grip. What all of these have in common is that it's slightly wasted, with a razor here in the middle and at the front. The half closer to the pommel is hexagonal, and the other half is an oval shape. The prototype version is wrapped in cord, and as you can see, it's a bit loose here on the riser. My recommendation for the production model would be to go the Albion way. So basically having a leather which is glued on and then wrapped in cord. Firstly, it's historical, and secondly, it's extremely durable. It has held the best from any swords I've owned. It also feels quite nice on the hand and gives you relatively good grip. A thread wrap like this actually gives better grip, but I think, at least for me, it's too harsh on my hands for prolonged training without gloves. Then we have the crossguard. It's a simple, what I would call a style 5 crossguard, and it's identical between all three swords. It's quite simple, but it has some nice decorations here and here. Also, in the very Kvetun way, the fit between the blade and the crossguard is exceptionally good. And again, remember, this is a prototype, so there are things which are far from optimal, like the tang coming out of the nut and some imperfections with the grip and so on. But again, already in this version, the fit between the blade and the crossguard is really good. It's way better than I've seen in, let's say, just most swords I own or my friends own. The only one I think comes even close is Albion. When I talked to the Kvetun guys about this, they just said that they can't make it worse using the method they actually fit the crossguard to the blade. So I'd say that's pretty good production methods if you actually have to go out of your way to make it worse than it already is, and it's already basically one of the best in the industry. And finally, of course, we have the blade. It's what I would call an 18A. And once again, two swords share the exact same blade, and the third one has a shorter one. The blade has a flattened diamond section, and it has a filler about 1/3 of the blade. A noticeable thing about these prototypes is that they actually have only a single sharp edge. What that means that for all of these swords, one of the edges is very, very sharp, and the other one is blunt. There's like a mil or so of blunt there. Naturally, for a production sword, both edges would be sharp. The blade ends up in a quite pointy point, but nothing super acute. What I recommended for Kvetun to do is to actually reinforce the point a bit, so now it just tapers down to a point. What I'd like to see is a bit more of a spearhead point where it slightly thickens close here, so it's less likely to actually bend or crack or anything like that. Naturally, you can destroy any blade if you just stab it to something like hard steel and twist it or drop it on a stone floor, but with an reinforced point, that is much less likely. Then let's get to the actual specs of these swords, so you know what the differences actually are. As said, Kvetun said just tell anything we want about these swords, you can share any specs you want. But however, I'm just going to stick to the general length and weight kind of specs. The reason for that is that I don't really see the use for giving blade widths and thicknesses along the blade and such for a prototype sword, because as said, things are probably going to change. However, the specs I'm sharing are the ones which actually allow you to understand the differences between these three versions. So the biggest of these three swords, the one which has a long handle and a long blade, that was the original of the three, and then the two other ones are variations of this sword. The length of this sword is 126.5 centimeters from the point to the end of the pommel knot. That means that we are not counting the excess thread here. If you are interested, the length from the point to the end of the pommel, not including the knot, is 125.5 centimeters, so a centimeter less. The blade is 95 centimeters and the grip is 20 centimeters. The blade is measured from the point to the cross, and the grip is measured from the cross to the end of the wrap, so start of the pommel. And it weighs 1,380 grams, so almost 1.4 kilos. And as I said, this was the original one from which the two are variations of. Then we have a short bladed version, which is the bottom one down here. It has a blade length of 90 centimeters, so 5 centimeters shorter. And it weighs 1,286 grams, so almost 1.3 kilos. Basically, it's almost exactly 100 grams lighter than the larger one. And as said, all the hilt components are exactly the same as on the bigger one. And finally, we have a short gripped version, which is the middle one here. The grip, again measured from the cross to the end of the wrap, is 17 centimeters. That is 3 centimeters less than on the two other swords. And this sword weighs 1,331 grams, so a bit over 1.3 kilos. Weight-wise, this means it's pretty much exactly between these two, so about 50 grams less than the bigger one and about 50 grams more than the smallest one. Now the important part here to understand is that the short-bladed one, which loses 100 grams compared to the long one, is losing it from the blade, which is in front of the hand. On the other hand, the short-gripped version is losing 50 grams, but it is losing it from the hilt components, so basically behind or around your hands. And this is going to make quite a noticeable difference. Then let's talk about the usability of these swords. So, as all three swords share the same pommel, let's start with it. It's flat and it gives a very good support for your hand. It allows you to bring your hand quite far back on the pommel and rest your palm on the flat. Again, I don't like to actually grip the pommel, but with this it's kind of possible, but not the most comfortable thing to do. But you can do it. The shape also allows you to easily index the blade with your weak hand. All in all, I think this is a very good shape for a sword like this. The edges on the pommel are also crisp, so they look good, but they are not sharp, so they don't feel bad on your hand, even without gloves. All in all, I really like the pommel. Next, the grip. As said, all of these are slightly wasted, so they thicken very slightly to the midpoint and then thin off until they meet the pommel. What's interesting here is that the pommel side of the grip is hexagonal and the front side is oval. I have actually never seen this before. I've seen fully oval and fully hexagonal grips, and I've seen grips which are basically reversed, so the front part is hexagonal and the back part is oval. I personally really like hexagonal grips because they allow me to very precisely index the blade. Basically, I always know where the edges are pointing. The thing is that they are not the most comfortable to hold, and that's why people don't necessarily like those. Again, it's personal preference. However, here the thing is that because the hilt actually narrows down in the hexagonal portion, it really doesn't feel bad at all on your hand, but it still allows you to easily index the blade using your non-dominant hand, and this is really good. With the larger front portion, the oval shape is easily enough to allow you to easily index the blade. As a combination of non-dominant hexagonal and dominant all, this gives you very good feel on the blade, and the sword allows you to easily grasp the sword, and it doesn't feel bad in the hand. Again, even without gloves. Originally, before actually holding these swords, I thought I'd probably not like this as much as a fully hexagonal or the other way around style of a grip. But now I'm a big fan of this. I think that this gives the best combination of actually being able to index the blade and still having the sword feel nice in the hand. I still do prefer, from completely usability and indexing point of view, a completely hexagonal blade. I also really like the Albion Alexandria blade with lots of risers. It gives extremely good grip. However, it feels like shit in the hand, but it's very usable. So, I think this way of making a grip gives a very good compromise with the usability, the ability to index and have a good grip on the blade, and the comfort factors. I'm quite a lot of a fan. So the crossguard, as said, it's shared by all three swords. It has some nice embellishments here and here, which makes it pop out a bit. But it's still simple, easy to keep clean, and so on. From the usability point of view, it does its job as a crossguard perfectly well, and it doesn't get in the way. It's not long enough to actually hit yourself in the head with, and it's, again, crisp but not sharp, so it doesn't actually rub on your hands or anything like that. You can have a very comfortable thumb grip with this sword. No problems here. Then the hilt as a whole. So as said, two of these swords have a longer grip, with the pommel being the same size. And then the third one has a shorter grip. The two of these with the longer grip allow you to have more than enough space for your hands. Even though you might think that 20 centimeters of a grip length is not that much, the fact is that there's quite a lot of neck on the pommel, and as the pommel is flat, you can have your hands quite far back. On the third sword with the 17 centimeter grip, there's still more than enough space for your hands, even though it might not sound like it. A 17 centimeter grip is something which is very much on the low end of still being not quite comfortable but usable for me with quite wide hands, if the sword has a wheel pommel. I can't remember from the top of my head what the grip length for Albion Alexandria or Cressy are, but they are somewhere around that ballpark. But as said, the pommel has quite a long neck, and with the nice flat bell shape, this allows me to have more than enough room for my hands even in a thumb grip, which is usually the grip I have most issues with when it comes to really short grips. For example, with Albion Alexandria, I really can't have a comfortable or even fully usable thumb grip. From these swords, the shorter grip is my preference, but that shouldn't be a surprise to anyone who knows me and my preference on sword grips. I really don't like the long grips on feathers, and I really like the shorter grips on, well, Albion swords, for example. However, even the longer grip, which is not my personal preference, is still completely usable. It is in no way long enough to get in your way, which is actually a problem with some swords. At least I didn't have the issue of hitting myself in the stomach with the pommel, or having the hilt getting caught on my hands or other stuff when doing transitions. Something like a lightning cut. As such, both lengths of the grip are completely suitable and work absolutely fine. But we'll get to the big difference they actually make later. Then the actual handling characteristics of these three swords. Let's start with the big boy. In my opinion, it is a good all-around sword. It feels nice in the hand, it's not clumsy in any way, but it's not really way too a thrusting-centric sword or a cutting-centric sword. It's an all-rounder. Blade doesn't feel too heavy in a cut, and the point is controllable when you're winding or turning the sword around. However, it's not the most responsive sword in that sense. As said, I'd call this an all-rounder. It's a good compromise between cutting and thrusting capacity. However, the thing is that to be a good training sword for cutting, it lacks just a bit in cutting power. You need to force the cuts just a bit too much, so it can teach you bad habits. If this sword was just a tiny bit better cutter, I think it would be a great training tool and everyday cutter. But as this prototype stands, it's lacking a bit in the cutting portion, but otherwise it's a great all-round sword. Then the short-bladed version, so it has a short blade and the same length of the grip as the bigger one. This is what I would call a thrust-centric sword, even though the blade is not that long. It's very nimble in the hand, it's very easy to move the point around, and it's very easy to keep the point in place if you want to. It would work extremely well as a thrusting style of a longsword for those who like to fence in that way. What it really lacks is cutting power. Naturally, it is a sharp sword, so you can cut with it, but you really need to give some oomph to the cut. The sword is not going to do you any favors when you're cutting. As such, it is a good sword, but it is not a good cutting sword. Of course, it can be used for power generation training as such, and it's going to punish you for any mistake you make, but as a normal training tool for cutting practice, not good. Here it is interesting to see between the big one and the short-bladed one how much just 5 centimeters of blade length and 100 grams can make in the handling and the cutting capacity of a sword. And finally the sword with the short grip and the full-sized blade. Before we get any further with this one, let's just say that this is my favorite of the three. And that's not by a small margin. This sword has a really nice presence in the cut. And I mean the blade presence. It feels like it wants to cut, but it doesn't feel heavy. It handles extremely nicely. It is a bit sluggish when winding and doing point work, but it's not horrible or bad feeling. It just has the rotation point back enough that keeping the point in place is a bit more difficult and making accurate thrust is thus more difficult. But it can still be used for thrusting and it's not bad in that way. It's just very cutting centric. And now we get to the big thing. This last sword is the best cutting sword I have ever used. And that is from someone who owns an Albion Precious Padona and has cut a lot with an Albion Alexandria. If I'd have to go to a bring your own sword cutting competition today, I'd want to have this one with 2 edges, of course, instead of using my pressure or loaning the Alexandria from a friend. This is that good. What that also means is that this is not in any way a good training tool for cutting. It's way too good. It basically takes all difficulty from cutting away, because the sword basically does all the work for you. Here it is once again very interesting to see the difference about 50 grams and a bit shorter grip makes to the cutting power of a sword. The full-sized sword is not a bad cutter, but it's not a good one either. The shorter grip one, which is 50 grams lighter, and I say lighter, not heavier, lighter, and has a slightly shorter grip, is light years ahead in cutting capacity. This was also one of the reasons why these two swords were made, the short blade one and the short grip one. We basically wanted to see what happens if you shrink the blade or the grip. How much of a difference does it make in a cutting sword? And the answer is a hell of a lot. When it comes to cutting training, all three of these swords have a relatively good sword wind. It's not the best around, but it's not bad either. That basically means that all three of these can be used as a training sword for cutting, but, well, I already went through how these work as a cutting sword when actually cutting something like tatami. Now, before we get to the conclusions, here is the cutting footage I mentioned before. XTaKeRuX, niin se on ihan sitä kädellä.
Joo. Otetaan vielä. Kokeillaan tää. Kokeillaan tää. Sitten tulee viimeinen tuolta.
Then to the conclusions. Let's start by going through very quickly the recommendations I gave for changes considering these. Firstly, for all, I recommended having a pinned pommel. I just think that it's superior to the threaded ones. I'm not going to go to more details why that is, but that's just my opinion. Secondly, I recommended going the Albion route with the grip. This means that instead of cord wrapping the grip, you use leather. Then while the glue for the leather is still drying, you wrap it in cord. This gives it a nice texture. A grip made in this way is extremely durable, it gives good enough grip, and it feels good enough in bare hands. I think it's still the best compromise when it comes to high quality sword grips, when it comes to usability and durability, and it's also historical. When it comes to the crossguards, there were no changes I think are necessary. For the blades, for the big one, if you can make it cut just a bit more, it can become an extremely good training tool. And for all of the swords, for the point, instead of just tapering to a point, I recommended that they should reinforce it. It just means that there's a less of a chance that the point is going to break or have any damage on it. It's really not going to affect the thrusting capacity of the sword in any way. Now that we have that out of the way, let's talk about general conclusions. Firstly, with this short-gripped, long-bladed version, I'm just going to say that even if it comes out like this with the pre-production stuff, prototype stuff ironed out, it's going to be one of the best, if not the best cutting sword in the market. In my opinion, it cuts already way better than any Albion I've handled. I don't have experience with Angus trim swords, so can't really compare. However, you American guys there who take part in bring your own sword cutting competitions, keep your eyes open because you might need to make some orders. I think this is going to be especially nice for those of you who are a bit smaller stature. The sword is not that heavy and it's not that long. It should be thus more usable for you small guys and girls. For the biggest one of the three, if it can cut just a bit better, it could be one of the best training tools for cutting on the market. That is because this is a very all-around good sword. It's not a very cutting-centric, it's not that thrusting-centric. So it gives a good representation of your generic longsword. It's already good for dry practice, so basically cutting air, but if it would cut just a bit better, it would also be great for cutting stuff like tatami. That would make it an excellent training tool. For collectors, well, you'll see when you'll see them. Like when they have the final production model with the grip and the final pommels and everything, then you'll know if you like the looks. Because when it comes to collecting sword, it's going to be quite a lot about the looks. When it comes to just the handling and quality of the sword, it's going to be there, so I'm not going to even question that. It's going to be about if you think this sword looks good. If you are one of the collectors who wants to have functional swords in addition to them looking nice, well, don't worry, they are going to be completely functional. So all in all, I think that these prototypes are an excellent start for Kvetun when it comes to sharp swords. Knowing Kvetun and being a friend of Alexander and talking to him quite a lot about swords, my expectations were quite high. However, on some levels these surpassed those, especially when it comes to this short-gripped super cutter. Personally, I'm very excited to see what the next iteration of these swords is going to be, and finally seeing what the production version or versions of this work is going to end up looking like and how it's going to perform. And as the last thing, I want to remind everyone that I'm not trying to give praise where it's not earned. It's in my interest, it's in Kvetun's interest, and it's in everyone else's interest who's looking into buying swords that honest feedback is given to the producer. And I honestly think that's also what Kvetun wants, so they can make their products better. And those were my thoughts on these sharp longsword prototypes from Kvetun. Remember to like and subscribe, and see you next time.